I stood in the hallway of Lincoln Elementary, watching through the narrow window as Mrs. Patterson arranged colored markers on small tables. My fingers worried the edge of my cardigan sleeve, pulling it down past my wrist, past my knuckles, until the fabric bunched in my palm. 10 years. 10 years of this unconscious gesture, this constant adjustment, this armor I wore against the world. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago. A cheerful email asking if I'd speak to the third graders about community helpers. I'd hesitated, my cursor hovering over the decline button for a full minute before some stubborn part of me, the part that remembered who I used to be, clicked accept instead. Now standing here with my stomach twisted into knots, I questioned that decision. Through the glass I could see 23 small faces, eager and open, the kind of faces that hadn't yet learned to look away from what made them uncomfortable. That's what terrified me most. Not cruelty. Children could be surprisingly cruel, yes, but their honesty, their unfiltered questions, their stares that lasted just a beat too long. Mrs. Patterson spotted me and waved, her smile warm and encouraging. I took a breath, smoothed my other sleeve, and pushed open the door. The classroom smelled like crayons and grape juice, a scent that transported me back to my own childhood, back to before the fire, before the hospital, before I learned to become invisible. The children looked up as I entered, and I felt the familiar prickle of awareness spread across my skin. I'd worn my safest outfit, a high-necked blouse under the cardigan, dark jeans, closed-toe flats. My hair was down, long enough now to hide the scars that crept up the side of my neck. The makeup covering my left cheek was expertly applied, a skill I'd perfected over countless mornings in front of my bathroom mirror. "Class, this is Miss Sarah," Mrs. Patterson announced. "She works at the community center downtown, helping people find jobs and learn new skills. Let's give her a warm Lincoln welcome." A chorus of "Hello, Miss Sarah" filled the room, and I managed to smile. I moved to the front, keeping my hands clasped together, and began my prepared speech about community service, about helping others, about small acts of kindness making big differences. Safe topics, rehearsed words. But halfway through, a little girl in the front row, she couldn't have been more than 8, with 2 braids tied with yellow ribbons and a gap where her front tooth should be, raised her hand. I nodded at her, expecting a question about the community center, or maybe what my favorite part of my job was. Instead, she tilted her head, studying me with those clear, unjudging eyes that only children possess, and asked, "Are you a hero too?" The question hit me like a physical force. My prepared speech evaporated. The room went very quiet, that particular silence that happens when everyone's holding their breath, waiting. I felt my sleeve slip slightly, exposing half an inch of scarred skin on my wrist, and I immediately tugged it back down. I'm not sure what you mean, sweetheart," I managed, though my voice came out smaller than I intended. She pointed at a poster on the wall, one showing firefighters and police officers and soldiers. "We've been learning about heroes," she explained earnestly. "People who save others and get hurt doing it. Mrs. Patterson said real heroes are everywhere, not just in movies. You have marks like my Uncle David. He pulled people from a car crash and got burned. Mom says his scars are proof he's brave." Time seemed to slow. Every eye in the room was on me now. The children's curious gazes, Mrs. Patterson's gentle, knowing look. The little girl waited for an answer with such innocent expectation, as if she'd simply asked about the weather. I could have deflected. Should have, probably. I'd spent a decade becoming an expert at changing subjects, redirecting conversations, constructing elaborate social architectures designed to keep people at a comfortable distance. But something in her question, in the pure lack of judgment behind it, cracked something open inside me. "How did you know?" I asked quietly. She shrugged, as if it was obvious. "Your sleeve moved when you were talking, and sometimes you touch your neck. My Uncle David does that too. Smart kid. Observant in the way children are when they're paying attention not to what you say, but to who you are." I looked down at my hands, still gripping each other like if I let go I might float away. Then I looked at Mrs. Patterson, who gave me the smallest nod, leaving the choice entirely mine, and I looked back at that little girl with her yellow ribbons and her missing tooth, and her complete, uncomplicated acceptance of the idea that scars and heroism might belong in the same sentence. "You want to know the truth?" I asked. She nodded. They all did, leaning forward slightly, 23 small humans ready to listen. "I don't feel like a hero," I said. "I feel like someone who just survived." And then, before I could stop myself, before I could rebuild the walls I'd maintained so carefully for so long, I began to tell them. Not the whole story. They were 8 and 9 years old after all. But enough. I told them about being 22 years old, about the apartment building where I'd lived, about the night I woke up to smoke so thick I couldn't see my own hands. The memories came back with startling clarity as I spoke. The acrid smell that burned my nose and throat. The heat that seemed to pulse like something alive. The moment of pure, primal terror when I realized the door to my bedroom was engulfed, that my only way out was through the window. I'd lived on the 3rd floor. There was no fire escape on that side of the building, just a narrow ledge and a long drop to the concrete below. I didn't tell them about the screaming, my own and others, or about how the fire sounded like breathing, like some massive creature consuming everything in its path. I didn't describe the exact moment when the flames caught my sleeve, my hair, my skin, or the smell that still haunted my nightmares sometimes. Those details belonged to me and to the therapist I'd finally started seeing 3 years after the fire, when the nightmares became unbearable. What I did tell them was that I'd climbed onto that ledge, that I'd hung there while the fire raged behind me, that I'd dropped just as the firefighters were arriving, that I'd broken my ankle along with getting burned. I told them about the hospital, about the weeks of treatment, about the kind nurses who'd held my hand through the painful dressing changes. I told them how scary it was, and how much it hurt, and how I'd wondered if I'd ever feel normal again. "But I did survive," I said softly, "and I got better. Not all the way. Some things don't heal completely, but enough." "So you are a hero," the girl said matter-of-factly, as if she'd just solved a math problem. "You saved yourself." I started to shake my head to explain that real heroes save other people, that I'd just been desperate and terrified. But Mrs. Patterson spoke before I could. "Emma's right," she said gently. "Surviving something that hard, going through all that pain, and then choosing to keep living, to help others, that takes tremendous courage." The word courage felt too big for what I'd done. All I'd done was wake up each day and force myself through it. Go to physical therapy even when every movement hurt. Sit through the psychiatric evaluations. Learn to dress my own wounds. Eventually, slowly, tentatively, begin to re-enter the world. But I'd also chosen to hide. That's what they didn't understand. After the physical wounds healed enough, after the surgeries were done, and the doctors said there was nothing more they could do, I'd made a conscious decision to cover up, to conceal, to pretend the fire had never happened. I'd switched from t-shirts to long sleeves, from dresses to jeans, from wearing my hair up to letting it hang like a curtain. I'd learned about color-correcting makeup and high collars, and 1,000 tiny ways to make myself look normal. I'd taken a job at the community center partly because it was meaningful work, but also because it meant I could help people one-on-one, in small rooms, with minimal public exposure. I'd stopped going to parties where people I didn't know might ask questions. I'd ended a relationship with a man I'd loved because I couldn't bear the way he tried so hard not to stare at my scars, the way his eyes would slide away from the damaged parts of me. I'd built a life that was functional, even good in many ways, but it was a life lived in the margins, always slightly apart, always ready to retreat. That wasn't courage. That was fear, dressed up in long sleeves and careful makeup. But these children were looking at me like I'd just told them I'd climbed Mount Everest, like the simple fact of my survival was something remarkable. And Emma, with her innocent question, had accidentally asked me to examine something I'd been avoiding for a decade. What did it mean to be a hero? What did it mean to be brave? "Can we see?" another child asked, a boy in a striped shirt, his tone genuinely curious, not morbid. "If that's okay," he added quickly, glancing at Mrs. Patterson. Every muscle in my body tensed. This was the moment I usually made excuses and left, the moment I'd been dreading since I'd agreed to come. But I was already here, already exposed in ways I hadn't expected to be. And something about Emma's question, about the way she'd equated my scars with her uncle's bravery, made me pause. "You don't have to," Mrs. Patterson said quickly, quietly, giving me an out. I could take it. I could smile and say maybe another time and redirect to a safer topic. That's what I'd done dozens of times before, in dozens of situations. The safe choice, the careful choice, the choice that let me return to my controlled, protected life. But I'd told them I'd survived. And if I couldn't even show the evidence of that survival to a room full of curious, accepting children, what did that say about the life I'd built? What did it say about the person I'd become? My hands were shaking as I reached for my left sleeve. I pushed it up slowly, revealing the scarred skin of my forearm, patches of smooth, shiny tissue interspersed with normal skin, a map of where the flames had touched me. The scars traveled up past my elbow, disappearing under the fabric of my blouse. The children leaned in, but not with disgust, with interest, with the same attention they might give to a butterfly or an interesting rock. "Does it hurt?" one asked. "Not anymore," I said. "It hurt a lot when it happened, and for a while after. Now it's just part of me. Sometimes the skin feels tighter than normal skin, and it doesn't tan or sweat the same way, but mostly I don't notice it day to day." "Is there more?" Emma asked, not demanding, just curious. I nodded. "On my shoulder, my neck, and a bit on my face, though that's covered with makeup right now." "Why do you cover it?" another girl asked. The question was so simple, so direct. Why did I cover it? I'd had a dozen answers prepared over the years. Professional appearance, personal preference. It's easier this way. But standing in front of these children, who'd asked nothing of me except honesty, the real answer rose up. Because I was scared, I said quietly. Scared that people would stare. Scared they'd ask questions I didn't want to answer. Scared they'd see me differently, treat me differently. Scared they'd see the scars and not me. "But you're still you," Emma pointed out, with the irrefutable logic of childhood. "The scars are just something that happened to you. They're not what you are." I felt my throat tighten, tears pricking at my eyes. How was it that an 8-year-old could see what I'd spent 10 years trying to hide from? I'd been so focused on concealing the physical evidence of the fire that I'd never stopped to consider that in doing so, I'd been concealing myself. Not just from others, but from me. "You're absolutely right," I managed, my voice rough. "I think I forgot that for a while." Mrs. Patterson had moved to stand beside me, and she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. My scarred shoulder, not that it mattered. "Class, I think Miss Sarah has taught us something even more important than what she came here to talk about today. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let people see us as we really are." The children nodded solemnly, absorbing this wisdom with the same seriousness they'd bring to any lesson. Then Emma raised her hand again. "Can I ask you something else?" I nodded, wondering what other truth this child was about to excavate. "Are you happy now? After all that happened? Did you get to be happy again?" The question knocked the breath out of me. Was I happy? I had a job I found meaningful. I had a small apartment I'd made comfortable. I had colleagues who respected me, clients who appreciated my help. I had a routine, a life that worked. But was I happy? I thought about the choices I'd made over the past decade. The parties I'd skipped. The relationships I'd kept at arm's length. The mirrors I'd angled to avoid certain reflections. The summers where I'd stayed fully covered while everyone else wore tank tops and sundresses. The photographs I'd stepped out of frame from. The small joys I'd denied myself because they required being seen, being vulnerable, being fully present in the world. I thought I was, I said slowly. But I think I was confusing being safe with being happy. They're not the same thing. "So, what will you do different now?" the boy in the striped shirt asked, as if personal transformation were as simple as deciding to try a new flavor of ice cream. "I don't know yet," I admitted. But I think I need to figure it out. When the session ended, the children gathered around me, asking more questions, some about the fire, others about the community center, still others about completely unrelated topics like my favorite color or whether I had any pets. Mrs. Patterson let them, seeming to understand that this was its own kind of lesson. Learning to be comfortable around difference, to ask questions with kindness, to see the person beyond the surface. Emma waited until the others had drifted away to pack up their things. Then she approached me one more time, clutching a drawing she'd made during the lesson. It showed a stick figure with long hair and what appeared to be colorful marks on her arms, clearly meant to be me. "I drew you as a superhero," she said, handing it to me, "because you are one, even if you don't feel like it yet." I took the drawing, my hands still trembling slightly. "Thank you, Emma. This means more than you know." She beamed at me, that gap-toothed smile radiant, before running off to join her classmates. Mrs. Patterson walked me to the door, pausing in the hallway outside the classroom. "You okay?" she asked. I looked down at Emma's drawing, at the proud stick figure with her colorful arms raised high, and then back at Mrs. Patterson. "I think I will be." "She's a special kid," Mrs. Patterson said. "Sees things clearly. Sometimes children understand things adults work very hard not to see." She asked me if I was happy, I said, and I realized I couldn't give her an honest yes. And now I think I need to learn what happy actually looks like. Not just safe, not just functional, actually happy. Mrs. Patterson smiled. "I think that's brave too. Different kind of brave than climbing out a burning building, but brave nonetheless." I left Lincoln Elementary that afternoon feeling like I'd been turned inside out. The spring air was warm on my face, and without thinking, I pushed my sleeves up to my elbows as I walked to my car. A woman passing by glanced at my scars, and I felt the old instinct to cover them, to hide. But I didn't. I just kept walking, Emma's drawing tucked under my arm, feeling the sun on skin that had been hidden for so long. The drive home took me through downtown, past the coffee shop where I always went through the drive-thru because it meant less interaction, less chance of being seen up close. On impulse, I pulled into a parking spot and went inside instead. The barista was young, maybe 20, with purple hair and a nose ring. She took my order with friendly efficiency, not staring at my scars, not looking away, just treating me like any other customer. When she handed me my coffee, she said, "Love your confidence. My sister has burn scars and she's still really self-conscious about them." The old me would have mumbled a thank you and hurried away. Instead, I met her eyes and said, "It took me a long time to get here. Tell your sister it's okay to take her time, but that hiding gets exhausting eventually." "I will," she said, her smile genuine. "Thanks." Such a small interaction, barely worth noting, but it felt seismic, revolutionary. I'd let myself be seen and nothing terrible had happened. The world hadn't ended. I just had a normal conversation like a normal person, and it was okay. That evening I sat in my apartment, the one I'd moved to after the fire, chosen partly for its excellent security system and partly because no one there knew my history. I'd created a sanctuary here, a place where I controlled every variable, where I could exist without performance or pretense. But looking around now, I saw it differently. Not as a sanctuary, as a hiding place. The walls were mostly bare. I'd hung a few generic prints from discount stores, landscapes and abstract designs that could belong to anyone. I'd avoided photographs, avoided anything too personal, as if decorating my space with pieces of my actual life might somehow expose me. My closet was full of clothes in dark colors, all with long sleeves, high necks, strategic coverage. I owned exactly 2 t-shirts, both relegated to pajama duty. I had makeup remover but never went anywhere without makeup covering the scars on my face and neck first. I'd built a life of such careful control that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without constantly managing other people's perceptions of me. Emma's question echoed in my mind. "Are you a hero too?" I thought about what heroism actually meant. As a child, I'd imagined it as dramatic. Firefighters charging into buildings, soldiers protecting others, doctors performing life-saving surgeries. Big, obvious acts of courage. But maybe Mrs. Patterson was right. Maybe there was heroism in simply surviving trauma, in getting up each day and choosing to keep going even when it hurt, in finding ways to help others even while carrying your own pain. And maybe there was a different kind of heroism, one I hadn't considered, in deciding to stop hiding, in choosing vulnerability over safety, in letting yourself be fully seen, scars and all, and trusting that you were enough exactly as you were. The next morning I woke up and went through my usual routine. Shower, carefully applied scar-covering makeup, long-sleeved blouse, cardigan. But as I reached for my hairdryer, planning to wear my hair down as always, I paused. The scars on my neck were covered with makeup, but visible if you looked. They'd always been visible, really. I'd just convinced myself that if I hid them well enough, people wouldn't see, wouldn't ask, wouldn't know. What if I stopped trying so hard? I pulled my hair back into a ponytail, leaving my neck exposed. The face staring back at me from the mirror looked different, more open, more honest, more like the person I'd been before the fire, before I'd learned to hide. At work, my colleague Jennifer did a double take when she saw me. "Your hair looks nice like that," she said carefully, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Thanks," I said simply, not offering explanation or apology. Throughout the morning, I caught people glancing at me, their gazes lingering on the visible scars on my neck. But instead of the judgment or pity I'd always feared, most people just looked and then moved on. A few asked if I'd been in an accident, and when I said yes years ago, they expressed sympathy and then changed the subject. So normal, so undramatic, so much less terrible than I'd built it up to be in my mind. The fear had always been worse than the reality. At lunch, I sat in the break room with Jennifer and two other colleagues, Marcus and Patricia. Usually I ate at my desk, claiming work to catch up on. But today I joined them, and somewhere in the middle of a conversation about weekend plans, Jennifer said, "Can I ask you something? And tell me if I'm out of line, but I've worked with you for 3 years and I feel like I barely know you. You're always so guarded. Did something happen?" The old me would have deflected, would have made a joke or changed the subject or suddenly remembered an urgent task. But I was trying to be braver now, trying to be the person Emma already saw me as. "There was a fire," I said. 10 years ago, I got burned pretty badly. I've spent a long time trying to hide it, trying to be normal. But I'm realizing that's exhausting and probably not very healthy." "Oh, Sarah," Patricia said softly. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry that happened to you." "But you've been hiding," Marcus asked, not unkindly. "Why?" "I was scared," I admitted. Scared people would treat me differently. Scared of the questions, the staring. Scared of being defined by the worst thing that ever happened to me. "We wouldn't have treated you differently," Jennifer said. "I mean, we might have asked questions, yeah, but not in a bad way. Just because we care about you." "I know that now," I said. "Or I'm starting to. It's hard to unlearn 10 years of fear." "What changed?" Patricia asked. I thought about Emma, about her gap-toothed smile and her simple, devastating question. A kid asked me if I was a hero, and I realized I'd been acting like someone who was ashamed, not someone who'd survived something difficult and came out the other side. "You are a hero," Marcus said firmly. "Maybe not in the comic book way, but in the real way. The way that actually matters." We talked for the rest of lunch. Really talked. The kind of conversation I'd been avoiding for years. They asked questions about the fire, about my recovery, about what it had been like. I answered honestly, finding that the more I talked about it, the less power it had over me. It was just a thing that had happened, not a shameful secret I had to protect at all costs. Over the following weeks, I continued the process of unlearning my fear. I bought new clothes, some with shorter sleeves, some with lower necklines. I wore my hair up more often. I started saying yes to social invitations I would have declined before. Not everything, not all at once, but gradually, tentatively, the way you might test water that you're not sure is too cold. Some days were harder than others. There were still moments when I caught someone staring, when I saw pity or discomfort in their eyes, when I felt the old urge to cover up and hide. But there were more moments, So many more, when people just saw me, when conversations flowed naturally, when I laughed freely without worrying about angles or lighting, when I forgot, for whole minutes at a time, that I was someone with scars. A month after my visit to Lincoln Elementary, I went back. Mrs. Patterson had emailed me, saying the class had been talking about my visit, that Emma especially asked about me often. Would I come back and share a little more about the work I did at the community center? This time, I wore a short-sleeved shirt. No makeup covering the scars on my neck and jaw. My hair pulled back. When I walked into the classroom, Emma's face lit up. "You look different," she said excitedly. "I feel different," I told her honestly. "You helped with that. Your question made me think about things I'd been avoiding. About being a hero. About being honest," I said. "About being brave enough to let people see all of me, not just the parts I thought were acceptable." We spent the hour talking about community service, about ways kids could help others, about the small actions that add up to make a difference. At the end, Emma raised her hand one more time. "Miss Sarah, are you happy now?" I smiled at her. This wise little girl with her yellow ribbons and her unflinching honesty. "I'm getting there, Emma. I'm definitely getting there." Because I was. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. I was starting to understand that happiness wasn't about having a perfect life, or a perfect body, or a perfect past. It was about showing up fully in the life you actually had. It was about connection and honesty, and letting yourself be vulnerable even when it scared you. The scars were still there. They'd always be there. Permanent reminders of the worst night of my life. But I was starting to see them the way Emma did. Not as sources of shame, but as proof of survival. Evidence that I'd been through something terrible and came out the other side. Maps of a journey I'd rather not have taken, but badges of honor nonetheless. I thought about that night often now, but differently. Not just the terror and pain, but what came after. The firefighter who'd held my hand in the ambulance. The nurses who'd treated me with such kindness. The physical therapist who'd celebrated every small victory with me. The therapist who'd helped me process the trauma. All the people who'd helped me survive and rebuild. And I thought about how I'd helped others since then. How working at the community center meant I was there for people at their lowest points. People who'd lost jobs or homes or hope. And I could tell them honestly that I knew what it was like to have to rebuild from nothing. That I understood how hard it was. That I'd done it and they could too. Maybe that was the real heroism, not in the dramatic moment of survival, but in all the small, unglamorous moments after. Getting up every day, choosing kindness, helping where you could, and eventually, finally, choosing honesty over hiding. 3 months after my first visit to Lincoln Elementary, the community center hosted an open house for people interested in volunteering. Dozens of people came through, and I spent the evening talking to them, answering questions, showing them around. I wore a sleeveless dress, the first time I'd worn one in public since the fire. The first time I'd deliberately exposed my scars to a room full of strangers. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Toward the end of the evening, a woman approached me. She was probably in her 30s, dressed professionally, her hands wrapped around her arms as if she was cold despite the warm weather. She kept glancing at my scars and then looking away quickly. "Can I help you?" I asked gently. She hesitated, then said quietly, "I was in a car accident 2 years ago. I have scars on my chest and arms. I always cover them. I saw you and I wondered how you did it. How you had the courage to let people see." I recognized her struggle intimately. "Can we sit for a minute?" I asked. We found a quiet corner and I told her an abbreviated version of my story. About the fire, about the decade of hiding, about a little girl who'd asked me if I was a hero, about how scared I'd been to stop covering up, and how it had gotten easier, slowly but surely. "I'm not saying you have to show your scars before you're ready," I told her. "Everyone's timeline is different, but I will say that hiding took so much energy, so much careful planning and constant vigilance. And when I finally stopped, when I let people see me as I actually am, I discovered that most people are kinder than I feared, and the ones who aren't, they say more about them than about me. But don't people stare? She asked. Sometimes, I admitted, and sometimes I still struggle with it. But less than I did, and I'd rather deal with occasional stares than spend the rest of my life hiding. She nodded slowly, processing. Then she carefully, tentatively, rolled up her sleeve, revealing scarred skin similar to mine. This is the first time I've shown anyone outside my family, she whispered. Thank you for trusting me with it, I said. We sat together for a while longer, two survivors of different traumas, finding solidarity in shared experience. Before she left, she hugged me and said, "You are brave. I hope I can be brave like that someday." "You already are," I told her. "You showed up here tonight. You showed me your scars. That's brave." After she'd gone, I thought about how healing isn't linear. It's not a straight path from trauma to recovery, from hiding to acceptance. It's messy and complicated, with setbacks and breakthroughs, with days of courage and days of fear. But slowly, imperceptibly, you change. You grow. You become someone who can sit with another person's pain and say, "I understand. I've been there. You're not alone." That night I drove home taking the long way, windows down, music playing. I stopped at the coffee shop, the same one where I'd first gone inside instead of using the drive-thru. The purple-haired barista was working again. "Hey," she said when she saw me. "I told my sister what you said. She actually went out without covering her scars for the first time last week. She wanted me to tell you thank you if I saw you again." "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. "Tell her I'm proud of her." "I will. Oh, and she started seeing a therapist. She said if you could do it, she could too." Small ripples spreading outward. One person's courage inspiring another's, creating a chain reaction of healing and hope. This was the heroism Emma had seen in me. The kind that happened in quiet moments, in honest conversations, in the simple act of showing up as yourself and trusting that was enough. The following week I was scheduled to lead a workshop at the community center about building resilience. Public speaking wasn't new to me. I'd done plenty of it over the years, but this was the first time I'd be standing in front of a group without my protective armor of long sleeves and high collars and carefully styled hair. Just me, visible and vulnerable, talking about overcoming adversity. 20 people showed up, ranging from recent job loss to housing insecurity to recovering from illness. I looked out at their faces, saw their own struggles written in tired eyes and tense shoulders, and felt a kinship with them. "We're here to talk about resilience," I began, which is basically a fancy word for the ability to get knocked down and get back up again. I'm not a psychologist or a motivational speaker. I'm just someone who got knocked down pretty hard and had to figure out how to stand again. I told them about the fire, not dwelling on the trauma itself, but on what came after, the long recovery, the fear, the isolation I'd imposed on myself. And then the turning point, the moment a child's innocent question had forced me to re-examine everything I'd been doing. "For 10 years I thought hiding was protecting myself," I said. "But it turns out I was just making myself smaller, trying to take up less space in the world, apologizing for existing in a body that bore visible evidence of trauma." I talked about the process of unlearning that fear, about the small steps and the setbacks, about the surprising moments of connection that came from letting people see my scars and, by extension, see me. I talked about how vulnerability felt like weakness at first, but turned out to be a kind of strength. At the end, during the question and answer session, a man in his 50s raised his hand. "I lost my job 6 months ago. Been applying everywhere, no luck. I'm starting to think something's wrong with me, that I'm broken somehow. How do you stop feeling broken?" The question hung in the air, heavy with his pain. I thought about how to answer, how to honor his struggle while offering hope. "I don't think we stop feeling broken," I said slowly. "At least I haven't. Some days I still look in the mirror and see damage, see the ways I'm not like I used to be. But I'm learning that broken doesn't mean worthless. Some of the most beautiful things in the world have cracks in them. Japanese pottery repairs breaks with gold, making the repaired pieces more valuable than the originals. They call it kintsugi, the art of precious scars. I held up my arm, showing my scars to the room. These aren't beautiful to me, not really, but they're proof that I survived. They're evidence of a story I lived through. And maybe that's worth something. Maybe you're not broken. Maybe you're just in the middle of your own kintsugi, waiting for the gold to fill in the cracks. The workshop ended with several people coming up to thank me, to share their own stories, to ask for resources or advice. Each conversation reminded me why I'd chosen this work, why helping others mattered so much. Because we're all carrying something. We're all scarred in one way or another. And there's profound power in saying, "Me too, I understand. You're not alone." As spring turned to summer, I found myself saying yes to things I'd avoided for years. A friend invited me to a pool party, and though my stomach twisted with anxiety, I went. I wore a swimsuit that didn't hide my scars, and though I felt exposed at first, everyone was too busy having fun to obsess over my appearance the way I'd always obsessed over it myself. I started dating again, tentatively at first, terrified of rejection. But I'd decided I'd rather be rejected for who I actually was than accepted for a carefully curated version of myself. The first man I went out with was kind, but ultimately not a match. The second asked too many questions about the fire too quickly, treating my trauma like a fascinating story rather than my actual life. The third, David, saw my scars on our first date and simply said, "Must have been scary," before moving on to talk about other things. We'd been seeing each other for 2 months now, and he treated my scars the way he treated everything else about me, as just one part of the whole, neither ignoring them nor making them the center of attention. One evening, as we walked through the park near my apartment, he said, "Can I tell you something? When I first saw your scars, I thought you must be incredibly strong. Anyone who's been through something that intense and still shows up to life with as much kindness as you do, that's real strength." "I don't feel strong most of the time," I admitted. "That's how I know you are," he said. "The people who think they're strong are usually the most fragile. The people who know they're scared but do the thing anyway. That's actual courage." I thought about Emma again, about how her question had set all of this in motion, about how one moment of truth from a child had cracked open 10 years of fear and forced me to examine the life I'd built, about how healing wasn't something that happened to you, but something you chose over and over in small daily decisions. On the 6-month anniversary of my first visit to Lincoln Elementary, I went back one more time. Mrs. Patterson had asked if I'd speak at their career day, and I'd agreed. But I also had something else planned. I found Emma. She'd grown taller in 6 months, her hair longer, but the gap-toothed smile was the same, and I gave her a card. Inside I'd written, "Thank you for asking the question that changed my life. Thank you for seeing me as a hero before I could see it myself. Your kindness and honesty helped me find courage I didn't know I had." She read it carefully, then looked up at me with solemn eyes. "You're really happy now, aren't you?" "I really am," I said, and meant it, because I was. Not in the uncomplicated way of fairy tales where trauma is erased and everything becomes perfect, but in the real, messy, beautiful way of actual human life. Happy because I'd stopped hiding. Happy because I'd found connection. Happy because I'd learned that being seen, really seen, scars and all, was terrifying and necessary and ultimately liberating. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. From the terrified woman who'd walked into Lincoln Elementary to the person I was becoming. Someone who could be vulnerable, who could let herself be seen, who could believe that her scars were proof of survival rather than sources of shame. I thought about the woman at the community center open house, about my purple-haired barista's sister, about the man at the resilience workshop. Small moments of connection, small acts of courage, rippling outward in ways I might never fully see. That's what Emma had really asked me that day, even if she didn't realize it. Would I have the courage to show up fully in my own life? Would I stop hiding and start living? And slowly, imperfectly, I was learning to answer yes. The scars would always be there. They're a permanent part of me now, physical evidence of the fire that almost took my life. But I was starting to understand that they weren't the most important thing about me. They were just one chapter in a longer story. A story that included trauma, yes, but also resilience, growth, connection, and hope. I was learning that heroism wasn't about being fearless. It was about being afraid and doing the brave thing anyway. It was getting up each day and choosing life, choosing honesty, choosing vulnerability. It was helping others even while carrying your own pain. It was letting a child's innocent question crack open your defenses and change everything. So if you're reading this, if you're hiding some part of yourself that feels too difficult or too painful or too different to show the world, I see you. I understand. There's no timeline for healing, no pressure to be brave before you're ready. But I will say this, hiding is exhausting. And on the other side of that fear, beyond the vulnerability, there's a kind of freedom you can't imagine until you experience it. It took me 10 years and one wise 8-year-old to learn that lesson. But I'm grateful I finally did. Because now when I look in the mirror, I don't just see scars. I see survival. I see strength. I see someone who got knocked down and found her way back up. Someone who's still learning, still growing, still figuring out what it means to be brave. And maybe, just maybe, that makes me a hero after all. Not the comic book kind, but the real kind. The kind that matters. If this story touched your heart, if you found yourself reflecting on your own scars, visible or invisible, I'd love for you to be part of this community. Subscribe to this channel for more stories about real human resilience, about the courage it takes to survive and heal, about the unexpected moments that change everything, because we all have stories worth telling, and sometimes sharing those stories is the bravest thing we can do. Hit that subscribe button and let's continue this journey together, learning that our scars, whatever form they take, are proof we're still here, still fighting, still choosing hope.